Well, it's good to be back with you, friends. I'm so glad you've joined in today as we go after more from our time in Nehemiah. What we're talking about is really what you and I talk about every week, and that's how all of this plays out in our lives. I mean, one of our core values is to be Monday morning relevant, for faith and worship and our pursuit of God to not be confined just to an hour on Sundays, but for each of our days to be marked by those things. So what are your days being marked by? How is the gospel playing out in your life, if it even is? What's marking our lives is a direct result of something much deeper. Where we find ourselves comes from somewhere. And simply put, it comes from what we believe. What we believe about ourselves, what we believe about others, and what we believe about God. You see, every action comes from a belief, actions being beliefs in motion. If you take some time to consider where you find yourself today and what you've been giving yourself to, how much of that is rooted in what your belief in the gospel has compelled? If we're not careful, if we aren't paying attention, much of what is playing out in our lives is unlikely to be traced back to a belief in the truth of the gospel. It can be traced back to something, it's rooted somewhere. And my hope is that more and more of how we live and how we move and more of our being would come from what God says is good and right and true. And here it's important that we don't get it flipped. Our actions are evidence of our beliefs, but if we find those actions to be inconsistent with the beliefs we claim to have, it's those beliefs, the source, that we need to focus on, not necessarily the outcome. If one morning I find a puddle of water underneath my refrigerator, I'm going to need to clean up the water, sure, but something is clearly wrong somewhere, and if I don't want more of a mess, I'm going to need to address the actual problem. I've talked to people about this for years, and usually I use the example of the fruit of the Spirit. If I come up to a situation and find myself being impatient, it's probably because something is off with my sight of Jesus. And I don't want to be focused on impatience, telling myself not to lose it here or there. I want to be focused on getting a better sight of Jesus, because increasing patience and gentleness and love and peace and other fruit comes from that. So I don't need to convince myself to be more patient or kind or whatever. I need to address where those come from. What is true needs to form what I believe, and it does for you as well. What do your actions say about what you believe? Is it Christ that you're proclaiming in those big and small ways, or something else? Our actions will match our hearts. Might those hearts be increasingly committed to God's purposes in and through each of us. We'll wrap up our time in Nehemiah on Sunday, and then be sure to join me again next week for more. See you then.